I did put the wines in the chat room, everyone. If you're going to enjoy them both, we'll talk about them, Royal St. Robert first, and then Homefield / Seafield. And the reason I'm saying that is because, first of all, Michigan has 2017s on both wines, and Chicago has 2018 on both wines. And the Homefield's name changed to Seafield in 2018. So there's nothing wrong. You're not wrong. You know, you've got the right wines. We're going to do something a little bit different. Normally, we start talking about the wines early on. We're going to wait till actually towards the end of our hour together. So by all means, play with them both. You know, enjoy them back and forth, however you'd like to do it. But we won't talk about them specifically for a little while. They're Pinots, you know, how difficult can this be? And I'll tell you, I started mine a little cool and they're opening up in the glass wonderfully. You know, the word Mondavi, I think the adjective iconic was invented for Mondavi in the wine business, because there are very few people who have not heard that name. And right before you got on, and it actually brings tears to my eyes. We were chatting, I was telling Carlo, you know, something I admired so deeply about his grandfather is that he made wine accessible to everyone, all styles, all price points. And how glorious is that? As inclusive as anything, but always quality. I have to tell you that one of the upsides of being in the wine business for a long time, like I have, is that you get this perspective over decades. And I remember being at University of Michigan and making a trip out to California and visiting the winery in, you know, the mid to late 70s, before I knew anything about anything. But I remember that beautiful building. And that was my first visit to wine country. And it certainly wasn't developed. And then I remember the joy of meeting Carlo's father, Tim. And I think the last time I saw him was on a very small plane going to the Aspen Food and Wine Festival. And I met Carlo for the first time a couple of days ago. We had a quick Zoom to talk about this. And I have to tell you, boy, you sure do have an open heart, Carlo, you know, and it's expressed in these wines. And, you know, I strongly suggest at some point in time, you go to their website. They have wonderful videos. But what I want to mention, a couple things, is that, and Carlo will talk to this, his ultimate goal is to make great Pinot Noir. And you sure are on the right track, because I don't commonly do this. I do admire very much the critic Antonio Galloni, and I tend not to look at his scores as much as I like to read his commentary. And I just love this comment. Brothers Carlo and Dante have wine in their veins, and they have an incredible knack for making world-class Pinot. And he was deeply impressed with them from the first moment they tasted them. I mean, it doesn't hurt to have a critic say something like that, so generous about your project as a whole. So
thank you, Madeline. He is. It's been wonderful to see the diversity, and Antonio has been such an advocate for great wines. A lot of the wines that I love, and I was really, Dante and I were really touched by the words that he wrote about RAEN when we began, because it is a lot of pressure to try to fill, and we're never going to be able to fill my grandfather's shoes or my father's, but there is that pressure, and it's always nice to hear kind words from people who get to taste the best wines around the world, including yourself. So thank you.
Oh,
I
no, absolutely. That. I mean, I find that very touching when I read something like that, because it gives me confidence, and it should give our guests confidence in everything you touch. So Carlo studied in Italy and in Burgundy. I love the fact that you worked at Dujac, because I admire their wines. He's going to tell us a little bit later about his, you know, passion, even obsession with a kind of agriculture called permaculture that I had to read about, and about a project called the Monarch Challenge. But you also need to know that he's got a little danger in his veins, because he is an award-winning snowboarder. Did I get that right?
Well, once upon a time, I mean, yeah, that was, I did do that professionally for 4 years, and it was a lot of fun. But I still feel like, I mean, that's my past life. I still do it every winter for fun, and I enjoy it a lot. Keeps me young.
Terry, one little pivot and then take it away. Somebody's not seeing the order in the chat. If you have both wines, taste the Royal St. Robert first and then the home field / Seafield. But you know, you're not going to make a mistake either way. So welcome to Detroit and Chicago, Carlo Mondavi. It's wonderful to have your company.
Thank you, Madeline. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for the really incredibly kind introduction. I'm sorry, you guys, about this awkward, like trying to figure out this. I'm literally putting my phone on a vine. This is COVID times. I mean, I can't believe we're able to connect like this, which is also amazing. I do miss being able to travel to Detroit and Chicago. I love those cities. I know that it's just been this whole year of trying to figure out how we're going to get through it, and I'm grateful for you guys to be able to connect like this and be able to taste wine. Madeline, thank you for making this happen, and to the entire Plum Market crew. It's really cool to be able to do this. So we have a little bit of a slide show. If I thought that we could kind of go through, and Sissy, who works with us at RAEN, and I'm gonna pull it up. Amazing. Are you guys able to see this?
Yep, we see it nicely. And I think, there we go. Sissy, oh my God, what a view. And that's I haven't even mentioned your brother, Dante. So you'll tell us about him.
Oh, my brother, Dante. I mean, I'm so fortunate that we really complement each other, and we both have this passion for Pinot Noir that my grandfather, Robert, really instilled in my father, Tim, and my father and our grandfather instilled in us. And so I've always had this love of Pinot Noir. And back at Robert Mondavi, we were making Pinot Noir, and my family's been making wine for just about over 100 years now. 1919 was our first harvest, which actually was the beginning of Prohibition.
So
and then
100 years of consecutive harvest, is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, 2020 makes 101 years, actually, but we can almost erase 2020, so we'll say 100 years. Yeah. But yeah, so that picture before with the coast, RAEN, we're a Pinot Noir domain focused on Pinot Noir, way out on the true Sonoma Coast. So on the edge of where you can achieve set and you can ripen fruit. So it's really, really cool. If you jump in that water, it's like an ice cream headache, even in summertime. I mean, it's chilly. And cooler. We're in an area that's cooler because of that maritime influence. We're cooler than Burgundy in many vintages. So just to give kind of a perspective, and this is also, I think, I don't mean to talk too much about climate change, but with that proximity to the ocean, I think we are a little bit more resilient to climate change, because continental climates might not have that kind of refrigerator right there connecting them. It's a little
and
more
your
distant.
alcohol levels are like under 14. I think both of these are fluttering between 12 and 13 and a half, right?
Yeah, in 2017 and 2018, we have, 2017, Royal St. Robert's, all of 12.5 alcohol. I mean, it was
Wow.
maybe 12.4. And we prefer that. And it's not necessarily something that we're just picking on decision-wise. We pick when the fruit's incredibly mature, but we're so close to the ocean that it's really cool. So it takes a lot longer. So we get a long hang time. Sugars accumulate very slowly, but that allows for flavors to have a longer time to accumulate. So, and retention of acidity, because your acidity is retained, and you perspire acidity through the cell wall of the grape. And so think of it almost like sweating. The grape sweats. And so the cooler it is, the more retention of acidity. The warmer it is, the quicker it perspires acidity. So I love this picture of my grandfather, Robert, on top of a gondola. Of course, this was, I think, just for fun, but it's really my great grandfather Cesare, my grandfather Robert, and my father Tim, who've kind of given Dante and I the tools and the know-how. They were really the ones pioneering so much of the science. When my grandfather and my father were making wine in the beginning of their kind of careers, we didn't know. Even for my father, it really wasn't until the 70s that we got to understand what malolactic fermentation is, or Enococcus, and how to take care of our barrels and how to take care of our cellars, and certainly the science behind winemaking. And so I really um, uh, love what they've been able to teach in terms of on the science. It's their generations. You know, it allows for us to really have, I think now, some of the best wines that are being produced
Oh,
in the
what
world.
great pictures. I wanted to ask, first of all, were you one of the kids who were stomping grapes there for fun or no?
No, no, I'm not in that photograph, but I did do that one time at Blessing of the Grapes, but it was more just for fun. And they were just stomping. I think it was that I Love Lucy kind of like
Right.
fun. Yeah. Yeah.
Is this your
So
grandma?
my great grandmother Rosa,
Wow.
who came over with my great grandfather Cesare in 1906. They settled it. We were from a poor town, and we were a poor family in a poor town in Italy with really no job opportunity. And my great grandfather said, "We have to move. We have to find something." And so there was a kind of a one-way ticket to the United States to work in the iron ore mines of Virginia, Minnesota.
Wow.
And so the paid ticket, they got on the boat with his, it was my great grandfather Cesare's brother Giuseppe, and the two of them went out first before they went back and said, okay, it's safe, and their wives came with them. But
What province in Italy were they from? Where were they from?
they're from Sassoferrato in northern Italy.
Oh.
So some lovely wines from the area, very close to Tuscany, but near the Adriatic coast. And so, yeah, I love this photo of my father and my grandfather as well, because you know they would talk. My grandfather, for example, with Opus One and Baron Fleet Rothschild, they would get together, and then it would be my father in the cellar realizing the wine. So my father was and remains for my family our technical viticulturalist and enologist. In 2004, my family sold Robert Mondavi. It was not a wanted sale; it was an unwanted sale, but turned out to be serendipitous. You know, it's just like what we're going through. You fall down, you get back up, you dust yourself off, and you keep going. And for my family, each time in '65, when we were asked to leave Charles Krug and begin Robert Mondavi in '66, elevated. And in '04, when we sold Robert Mondavi, we elevated my grandfather Robert, my father Tim, my aunt Marcy began Continuum. But at that moment, we stopped making anything but that one wine. So single wine from a single site in Napa Valley. We stopped making Pinot Noir. We stopped making Chardonnay, or anything else. And meanwhile, my brother Dante and I, you know, I went to college in France. I worked in Burgundy. I've worked in Italy. My brother Dante is a crazy Pinot Noir guy. And so after looking for a long time, we began RAEN, because food, I should say, wine is sacred to my family. It has been what has put food on my family's table for now over 100 years. And so we take it very, very seriously. So going and saying, hey, we're going to start a new wine project was not something that you could just float by at the kitchen table casually. My father really wanted to make sure that everything was really well thought. Of course, that was one of those kind of working underneath him for years and years and years. It was a complicated decision. But finally, Dante and I began RAEN in 2013. And I love this picture because it shows a bit of our past and some of the
This
inspiration
says
for Dante
Burgundy, correct? This says
and I.
Burgundy.
Yeah. And well, there's a cool, interesting thing to that, Madeline, because back then in the early days, this bottle, this 1944 Charles Krug, my great grandfather Cesare, my grandfather Robert, and his brother Peter made together.
Wow.
And back then, it's wild. Back then, if it was Chardonnay, it was called Chablis. If it was sparkling wine, it's called Champagne. Cabernet was called Bordeaux. Sangiovese was Chianti. It wasn't actually being called, Pinot Noir was Burgundy. And so my grandfather, when you look at the Robert Mondavi wines in 1965, when leaving Robert Mondavi, he said, you know, first off, we have the soil, the climate, the know-how to make wines that can sit with the best wines of the world. We really should be proud of that. And when he began Robert Mondavi Winery, he was the first to unilaterally, through all wines, say, this isn't Burgundy, this isn't Champagne, this isn't Bordeaux, this is Napa Valley, so the place of where it came from, and we're making Pinot Noir in this instance. And so
he was a pioneer in his labeling as well, correct?
yeah, and it was the perfect time for that. There was this deep interest in place and site, and certainly the beginning of that all with Robert Mondavi Winery was kind of a massive changing point. In first, my grandfather was called crazy. he went in 1962 before this, one of the trips that kind of led to both his hardest times in his life and the best times. He went to Bordeaux, Burgundy, visited the Grand Crus, the first grow, said, "What are you doing in the vineyards? What are you doing in the cellar?" They said, "Robert, we'll tell you everything, just don't tell our neighbors." They said, "Who's this guy from California?" And so he came back with this fire in his belly and said, "We have the soil, the climate, that know how to make wines that can sit with the great wines of the world." That led to, because of course, the wine industry was a very different place. It was incredibly challenging. There was, we were barely making it. It was just, a penny game. We were barely getting by. And the idea of spending more money in the vineyards and spending more money in the cellar to elevate to the level where he wanted to be was not accepted, and certainly wasn't accepted by my family or his brother. And that led to him being kicked out of Charles Krug in 65 and beginning Robert Mondavi in 66. But he began with that goal, and people thought he was crazy. And so this, and now, through blind tastings, the Judgment of Paris, and my grandfather was one of the first ones. I remember he told me a story about him going actually out to Detroit, Chicago, and on the visit, it was his first visit. He spent all this money in the vineyards, all this in the cellar, went out, said, "Try these wines." And I said, "These are great, but they cost 25 cents more than what I'm buying from Napa Valley." It was traded like, wine was traded almost like barrels of oil. It was like there wasn't a quality difference. He said, "But you don't understand." And so he came back defeated, and he went back into the market, and he put 3 bottles in brown bags. And he said, "Try these 3 wines and tell me what you think." And they would taste them all. And oftentimes, because of the improvements, my grandfather was the pioneer of stainless steel. So he was the first one. Again, we didn't understand microbiology very well at that point in time. So we didn't understand how to keep our barrels clean. We didn't even understand how to identify like Brettanomyces or Enococcus or a lot of these like microbiological little like mishappenings. And so he went to the milk industry, pioneered stainless steel from that into the wine industry, and had very clean, beautiful wines that had incredible expression. For the best wines, they were getting all new oak, because if you don't understand what's going on a microbiological level, you can start with a blank canvas, and new barrels was the blank canvas. Now, and that was also for him to get closer to terroir. Now we understand microbiology at a much higher level. And so our ability to get closer to terroir, to the site, is actually even easier with less new barrels, because you don't get the aldehydes from the wood and all that. Sorry, I'm going into a tangent.
No, this is great, because frankly, I'm listening rapt, and I'm sure everyone is, but he did so much of the hard work for you. I mean, I know you probably feel so deeply grateful that you're the beneficiary of a lot of challenges that he addressed.
Absolutely. And that is, I always say that because of the hard work that my grandfather's generation and my father's generation did on the science of winemaking, that we are having, first off, the best wines that in the history of wine. But secondly, that the chance for us to progress now has shifted a bit. And this is where I'm very passionate. You had mentioned this earlier about farming. And so, Dante and I, we've said, okay, we're going to progress in farming by digressing. And so, we can actually go to the next slide, Sissy, if you'd like. So
your brother the two of you couldn't look more different. Are you different in character? And do you argue with each other, or are you on the same page?
No, he's a sweetheart. He is the calmest, most he reminds me of what I never met my great grandfather, but what I heard of him. He's a man of few words. When he talks, people listen, and he's a very substantive individual, and we get along great. In that regard. We're kind of a yin and yang, and we are different, but we gravitate towards the same kind of final decisions in wine, which is really also nice, because if he wanted to go different directions, it would be challenging, but we both agree on
what
on
a
overall.
lucky collaboration. I'm pivoting just to ask you, because I've just noticed this. Is this a familial icon of some sort?
No,
the little crown?
Yeah, no, the crown I actually hand drew, and it's on the neck label of the bottle. And right below that, or above it is, or below that is RGM Heart and Soul. And that is, it stands for Robert Gerald Mondavi, Heart and Soul, because he said you always have to put your heart and soul into whatever you do in life. And so a lot of the label, like I hand drew. In fact, the 2013 vintage, I hand drew the whole thing, and it's terrible. So we got professional illustrators to help us, but there's still a couple of things that are from kind of the original hand drawings. But so Dante and I began RAEN in 2013, and I think just to talk about our overall philosophy in winemaking, I think it's important is, first thing is site. Great wine comes from great sites. And my favorite wines come from some of the most beautiful places on earth. And certainly when we set out with RAEN, we said, we know that there's Grand Crus, if you will, from the Sonoma Coast way out here on this edge. And so we looked for over a decade and found these 3 special holdings. We farm about 18.5 acres. So starting with a great site, that is very big. And then secondly, how you honor and you farm that site is where I really believe that our generation can progress. So we have a trilogy of farming. You can see here, there's the Fort Ross Seaview Seafield.
Can you go back to the map, Sissy, just for a moment? This is like, oh, I'm sorry. I should let Sissy do the I'm a pushy little thing, but she's
jump in there, please.
Yeah.
No, this is 2 miles, right, to the Pacific? I mean,
Fort Ross Seaview, the Seafield or home field, depending on. And the name change was simply a love letter we got from a lawyer saying basically cease and desist from using the name. We use the name because that was the name that had been used for years before, and we certainly didn't want to get involved in anything. So we're actually walking it with the geologist Brenna Quibley, who did this map, and she said, this is an ancient sea field. It's uplifted, super diverse soils, and it's a sea field. And so we say, well, we'll just change home to sea, and it'll be Seafield. It'll be more accurate of what it is. So yeah, under 2 miles from the ocean. And if you're having the 2017, it's up in the upper part of the map here. If you're having the 2017, it says home field. If it's the 18, it says Seafield. And then down about 4 miles from the ocean, but the elevation changes significantly. It's freestone
what elevation are we at? We're over 1,000 feet at Fort Ross Seaview. Isn't that right?
About 1,500 feet of elevation at Fort Ross Seaview, so very high above the fog. And then down at Royal St. Robert and Bodega, you're at about 400 to 500 feet, so you're underneath the fog. So you have, and but you're also twice as far from the ocean. It's interesting, we picked them within days of each other because of the proximity of the ocean. It's cooler, but you're higher in elevation, so you're in the sun, whereas you're further from the ocean, but you're lower in elevation. So there's this like interesting kind of inversion that happens that ends up having our fruit be mature roughly within days of each other, which is kind of interesting. But these are out on the true coast. So, if you're coming from Napa, or if you're coming from somewhere a bit warmer, by the time you get there, you might have left in shorts and a t-shirt. By the time you get to where we are, you're in a micro puffy. It's very, very cool. And again, really ideal for Pinot Noir. And so going to the next slide, we're just to show you the microflora, because what goes into wine, we talk a lot about terroir and the earth and the climate and our interaction with it. But one thing that we don't talk a lot about is the microflora, and that's the environment around the vineyard. So you can see this is the winter microflora. On the left, you have your home field Seafield block. And then on the right is Royal St. Robert and Bodega. And you get this environment, and that becomes a part of the wine because that literally sticks to the bloom of the grape. So here's the winter flora. And then if we go to the next slide, I think it shows you the spring flora. So kind of the sour grass, those yellow flowers, and the red flowers, the crimson clover, and then the white clover and grasses. And so talking really quickly about our farming philosophy, we start off with this idea of a permaculture, that basically the farm will sustain itself. A permaculture is literally, for me, the holy grail of farming, where if you have a pest that comes into your vineyard, you have beneficial flowers that bring in beneficial insects that kick them out. There's this biodiversity that really doesn't allow for the outbreak of anything bad. So in the back of this picture of the yellow flowers, you can see the 2 owl boxes. And those owl boxes, a nesting owl, which we're really happy to say, both are fully occupied and have been the last 2 harvests. A fully occupied, a nesting owl box with babies eat up to 20 gophers in an evening. So they help keep the gopher population down. So it's this
No kidding.
idea of,
Yes.
yeah, it's wild, and it really helps. So that's the idea of a permaculture is that it self-sustains, and we're always looking for permaculture remedies. So here's a bluebird box. So we have blue-green sharpshooters. This is above bodega. Blue-green sharpshooters are the vector for Pierce disease, and they're terrible. They bite onto the green canes when the vines are growing, and they essentially it kills the vine. There's no cure for Pierce disease once it's been infected, and so bluebirds love blue-green sharpshooters.
Oh my God,
And
they are your best friends. I mean,
yeah,
they solve a big problem.
we love them, and we had to replant like 400 vines just in this tiny little 1.8 acre block. And we put out the bluebird boxes. Now I remember the first year we put them out, I was like, I really hope this works, because it's a beautiful solution if it does. And we put out the first one. I got to the top, came back down after putting them up throughout Royal St. Robert, and I'm not kidding you, there was a bluebird sitting on top of this box. It's like a magnet for them. And so we've seen blue-green sharpshooter populations go down, bluebird populations go up, and again another positive permaculture farming solution. This is one of my favorites.
God. Is she a baby here?
This was when she was first brought to the Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue. So she was orphaned in Santa Rosa, and they normally will release the wildlife that they capture to rehabilitate back to the same area where they found them. And this is an incredible, the Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue, they do wonderful work. And Doris was caught in Santa Rosa, which is a town, it's a city, and really not an ideal place to re-release. So Doris asked us, the human who didn't start it, but she runs the Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue, asked if she could release Doris the bobcat in the forest between Bodega and Royal St. Robert. And we said, absolutely. This was not this last spring, but the spring before. And we released her, and we hadn't seen her. And then right around the time when the first lockdown happened in late March, early February, I was driving up to Royal St. Robert, and she was sitting there underneath the tree basking in the sun. And I sat there and watched her for like 10 minutes. I was like, oh my gosh, that's Doris. She's doing great. And then not 2 days later, we have footage of her from a neighbor, saw her hunting and capturing gophers in Royal St. Robert. And so this idea of the permaculture really is working. We've since released Gray, which is a beautiful fox that is actually a good hunter. She had a little bit of a neurological issue, but so we've become a sanctuary for wildlife, and it's been amazing. And so we can't find a permaculture remedy. We go to a biodynamic remedy, which is really another farming practice that is in unison with nature. But we have a caveat where biodynamics stresses having farming wildlife on the farm, and the integration of animals into the farm. We've pivoted from like us having influence on the animals, and we've brought in wild, native, natural animals like Doris the bobcat and Gray the fox.
Well,
so
I have to ask you at this point, I'm interrupting only because I've got a couple, 3 comments for people who are dying to know where the name came from. And I think you've set us up for this, yes?
Yeah, no, Doris.
No, I mean, RAEN, the name RAEN.
RAEN.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I've got stories for all these names.
But we'll hear about Doris too. Cool.
No. Yeah, RAEN is actually, it ties right back into, so after farming, it really becomes about winemaking. And RAEN talks about the overall perspective of winemaking. It's comes from a story that my father told my brothers and sisters and I when we were little. And he said, and I used to think my dad was this was when I was very little, this mad scientist, that winemaking was so scientific, and it is, and you can get as scientific about a leaf if you wanted to. Long story short, he said, you guys realize, and I remember because this changed my life and like my perspective about so much. And he said, you guys realize that wine is the most natural beverage you can have, that the alchemy or miracle of rain falling on the fields becomes wine every year if you do nothing at all in the vineyards. This miracle of water to wine is a totally natural phenomenon. And so it's a double meaning rain, the idea that rain that falls, and also the unique spelling. But he said, if you think about it, it rains in the fields, filters through the rocks, the vines drink, the sun sweetens it. And then on the outside of a grape, there's a wax. It's on everything that's out in nature. It's this wax, and the wax collects on the plants collects the native yeast that's floating through the air, collects the resin from the flowers, the grasses, the trees, the dirt, all stick to that wax and create the bloom. And within the bloom, there's over 50,000 individual yeast cells. And so if you do nothing at all, you know, under the hot, in fact, there's a grape here, you can see here, I don't know if you can see that, but when I polish off that wax, well, that's where all that yeast is. So if you do nothing at all, a bee will come bite the grape open, or a bird bites it open. The juice mixes with the skins, sugar plus yeast yields alcohol right there without intervention. RAEN becomes wine. And then the unique spelling RAEN stands for our dedication to research in agriculture and enology naturally. So all the wines are natively fermented. We don't add yeast. We don't allow yeast in the winery. We don't fine, we don't filter. We also say agriculture and not viticulture, because we stress the overall biology of both the soils and the forest and the flora around. So the whole entire environment, because like anything, any single crop can be very much a monocrop, and we stress biodiversity in that regard. And so that's kind of the.
Did you and Dante come up with the name together, or was it a mad moment after having some relaxing beers or wine, or did you just sort of meditate on it for a while?
I think it was, we always loved this story of rain becoming wine, and that idea that water becomes wine, this like natural phenomenon. I think that we felt like that RAIN just was not going to be, it wasn't going to be a good name. And so then we started playing with it, and that's how we came up with this kind of, also the secondary meaning of telling the story of rain becoming wine. And so the agriculture and enology part and natural part. And so, you know, the best wines in the world are natural wines. And I also don't want to mistake that for the new natural wine movement, which is oftentimes, I think, used as a crutch to say, hey, you know, this wine doesn't taste good, but it's because it's natural. And natural wine should taste great. And so I don't know if that's kind of, I know certain cities like in, you know, Paris or London or Copenhagen or some, you know, Chicago, New York, there's these new natural wine bars popping up, and sometimes you go in and you're like, I can't drink this stuff.
No, you know what? I mean, at the end of the day, I'm open to anything, and I'm a village elder. But if I put my nose in the glass and I don't get some sort of reaction, even a fraction of what I had to the smell of your Pinots, I am not a happy girl, you know, I mean, but I, you know, we remain open because there's room for everyone at the table, right, Carlo?
100%. And I love diversity in wine. And so I completely agree with you. And I'm also drawn first and foremost in wines to aromatics. And to me, that's one of the most important things. And that's, you know, Dante and I do crazy things. You can see this picture of him here. You know, we're picking in the darkness of the night when it's cool.
We're talking 2 in the morning, right?
Yeah.
Right.
You can see on the cork the date, time, and moon phase of when we picked.
Oh, go away.
And
let me see if I have the corks here. Seriously?
Yeah. We're looking at the moon phase from just a understanding of, like, you know, moonlight is indirect sunlight. So in theory,
waxing crescent plus full corn moon. Oh my goodness.
yeah. So we've picked now under all
Look
different,
at your
all sorts
corks.
of different moon phases. Yeah, it's kind of fun. And so, you know, that way when the fruit arrives, it's cooler. That cool temperature sets the fruit and flower into the juice, and allows for that aromatic lift to really be more a part of the wine itself. Fruit and flower, I think, is one of the easiest things to volatilize off and lose. And so we really do quite a bit on just trying to capture that within nature, within being able to pick when it's cool and have it all in the tank nice and cool.
Are you intentional about what phase the moon is in, about when you harvest, or is that like, will you adjust it by a day or two if you think it is? Because that's, you know, we're scooching into biodynamic land now here, right?
Yeah, no, we I believe very much in the moon, but it's wine is or harvest is kind of like having a baby. When the baby's ready to come, the baby's ready to come. And so we basically we pick always based on what the fruit's saying and not what the moon is saying. But we do observe the moon, and we do like our pruning. So we go through and we'll prune the vineyard based on moon phases. So on a new moon, we will do our rackings and our bottlings based on moon phases. but there is such a thing as like lunar burn, where if you prune on a full moon, you can get lunar burn because the vine will be pumping and it'll push out a bud position, which is quite crazy to think about. And it doesn't happen, but if you had like a king tide with a new moon, with a full moon, you could see some real activity on the sap flow of the plant. And so we do observe that, but not with harvest. Harvest is the one thing that we
the grape tells you. That's right. So
Yeah.
tell me, along the lines of what you're doing here, do you do some foot treading, or is that occasional?
No, we in 13 we did, because that was kind of what we thought, you know, you were supposed to do. But no, now we do no foot treading at all. We're really gentle with our we were doing experiments in 13, so we tried a lot of different things. That was our first vintage where, you know, Dante and I had been working at all sorts of other wineries and learning. At 13, we said, okay, we're going to experiment with these blocks and learn as much as we can. And so we tried foot treading in one of them. And I have friends that do that quite a bit. I have nothing against it. I prefer for the wines that we make to not be foot treaded. We look for more gentle, delicate extractions. So what we do is we sort in the vineyards, and then we sort again in the cellar. And you can see that in the video in 2013. We actually have a video of us doing that, but we don't actually. That was the last vintage.
That's where I saw it. And I want to really encourage everyone again to go to your website, because if nothing else, all wine aside, you will see the staggering beauty of the Sonoma Coast, and whoever produced those films for you did a great job.
Thank you. He's a really, really good friend of mine, Ian. He's making incredible films now, but he came from the ski and snowboarding world. I met him through snowboarding. He was making amazing snowboard films, and now he makes like amazing like Hollywood films. But a good guy. Thank you for that, and I'll pass on the good word to him.
Please.
Yeah.
So
for on the winemaking side, our philosophy is very delicate, very gentle. We are also a whole cluster house, which I don't know, Sissy, if you want to go to the next slide. So this shows you kind of, we in the beginning, I guess on a trip my brother Dante and I took back in 2002, we visited my grandfather wanted to show us what he saw that gave him the fire in his belly back in 1962. So we went to Bordeaux and Burgundy. We visited the Grand Crus and the First Grès, and there was a domain. There's two domains that just blew my mind in Burgundy. That I said, what are these guys doing? This wine is so aromatic. It's so lifted. It's so incredible. And it turns out that they were a whole cluster house. And the domains were Domaine de la Romanie Conti and Domaine Dujac, two dear friends of mine, and Dante's and mine. And
how old were you at the time when you first saw this? Were you in your early 20s?
20 years old. Yeah. And so, you know, we came back with this fire in our belly. We said, you know, we can make whole cluster wine on the coast. We have to really experiment. So in 13 we experimented, in 14 we experimented, in 15 you really see RAEN becoming the domain that it is. That, you know, we're over 75% whole cluster every year. 2018 and 17 are both 100% whole cluster. And will
you kindly very simply explain to everyone, because they're not in the trade, what whole cluster means? Because, and by the way, I have never seen a picture like this where someone shows the cluster after fermentation, but just explain very basically the difference between this and destemming.
Yeah, so whole cluster fermentation is the ancient way of making wines. If you think about it, if you go back thousands of years, hundreds of years, to, you know, when the monks were making the wines, if they wanted to destem, they had to do it by hand. There wasn't the technology to destem. Now with destemming technology, 99.9% of the wines are destemmed. There is a little bit of a kind of a trend going back towards this ancient way of making wines. But for Dante and I, it was not about this romance of this kind of really cool old school way of making wine. It was actually because of the quality, the aromatic lift, the texture. And so we began, and this picture sums it up right here. I'll give you a juxtaposition in fermentations, like broad stroke. If you destemmed all of your fruit, so you take these clusters, you take all the berries off and you fill a tank and you do a pump over or a punch down, you now have, this is for a destem fermentation, you now have essentially a homogeneous tank of skin, seeds, and juice. All of the sugar that is in the fruit is available to all the yeast that's in the fruit or on the skins. And so fermentations are hotter, they're faster, they race to finish, and they're relatively easier to manage with great texture, and they can be lovely wines. I do love descend wines. Again, I love the diversity of wines. But what we love about whole cluster is a juxtaposition. We sort in the vineyards, and then we sort again in the cellar. You fill the tank with the fruit. The weight of the cap crushes the berries at the bottom. That juice comes into contact with the skin and begins to ferment slowly but surely. So off gassism is protecting the cap, and slowly but surely, instead of one big tank fermenting, we have hundreds of thousands of little micro ferments happening inside the berry in an intercellular enzymatic way. And so you get an order of magnitude greater aromatic esters, because those aromatic esters that are shooting out of the top through the headspace are being retained back into the juice because they're encapsulated within the berry. And
That
so
is
you
the
get
most
that.
poetic description of whole cluster fermentation I've ever heard. Bravo.
Awesome. Thanks, Madeline. Yeah, no, and so it creates that the rose petal and tea effect. Like, I love to blind RAEN with Romany Conti and Dujac on the wall. Never to say that we're better, but always just first to show that we can sit in the company of the great wines of the world. And those two wines, those three wines, they're like godlike wines.
Your bar is very high, and I think that's just spectacular.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. They are, and we have that same fire in our bellies that we believe that we have the soil, the climate to know how to make wines that can sit in the company of the great wines of the world. And so it's been fun. So
now everyone is sitting here going, where's the third wine, Madeline? So we have, we don't have the bodega, correct? We have, that is the third wine that you make. We have the Royal St. Robert and the Seafield or Home Field. So, no confusion here. We opted to do two wines instead of three.
And we keep focus on, just three vineyards. We make a little Chardonnay as well, which is kind of a friends and family, and we do some fun with it. But our focus in Royal St. Robert is the wine that, we made this in honor of our grandfather. He wasn't royal nor a saint, but we certainly looked up to him. And I gotta show you guys this cluster. I just found some clusters that the birds seem to have missed. It's getting its last kiss of sunlight today here. But a bottling dedicated to our grandfather. We always felt like he could walk on wine. He inspired us from a philosophical way, and our father from a technical way, for our entire lives. And he continues to with the bottles that we're fortunate to be able to
By the way, we haven't mentioned your father's name is Tim. We've been talking about him, but is it Timoteo, or what is it in Italian? It's not a very Italian sounding name.
Well, that goes back to the time of, we were immigrants, and my great grandparents were immigrants. They named their children Italian names, and my grandfather was very shy. He felt that he didn't fit in, and so he wanted his kids to fit in. So he actually spoke perfect Italian, but he'd always talk to my great grandparents in English, and he was shy about his heritage. And my dad said, so he named, Michael, Timothy, and Marcy, very American names. And my dad reverted back and he said, hey, we should be proud of our heritage. So it's, I'm Carlo, Dante, Chiara, Carissa. I'm one of five, my brother Dominic. And so that's kind of the whole journey on the name.
No, I mean, I'm second generation Greek American, so I understand that. So tell us about Royal St. Robert. This is, I just think the aromatics on this wine are so special, so generous. I don't even want to define them, but if everyone's got the wine, if you can start playing with it, and Carlo will tell us about it.
Yeah, so thank you. That's very sweet. I agree with you that it's really about discovering those flavors and scents on your own, especially when you have a palate as sharp as yours. But I try to describe Royal St. Robert as kind of an environment. So imagine you're walking through an oak forest. So you have you got those crunchy leaves underneath your feet. Maybe there's a couple thorny brown mushrooms poking through the foliage with that forest floor underneath. And then you step out into a dry meadow with that kind of like dry grass, like kind of thing. And, there's dirt underneath that dry grass you can like break up in your hand, and it's like chalky. And then if you took a gray rock from a pristine river, you can like lick that rock and get that minerality sense. And you put the rock down in the fringe between the forest and the meadow, and you smashed a wild cherry and a wild strawberry on it, and then sprinkled some red rose petals around that with a little piece of bitter dark chocolate and a little piece of dry vanilla bean, and then some black tea. And then picture it's a hot summer day. Imagine that clouds gather overhead. It rains on that environment for a couple seconds. The clouds break, the sun hits it, and then that aromatic of that forest floor, the thorny brown mushroom, the crunchy leaves, the grass, the wet rock, and the wild cherry, strawberry, rose petals, black tea. That's kind of, I always feel like that's the expression I see in Royal St. Robert.
But also, I will say, because a lot of times when I'm describing wines to, and by the way, do you write these? Because these are poetic as well. Is this your handwriting these?
Well, no, it's just from the same. Yeah, I've come up with, but it's from the same reason that you know, to describe an environment, I think is a more fulfilling. You can picture those and taste those and feel those things, and just saying it's, you know, underripe strawberry with, you know, red cherry, and I try to put it into a place, and then you can feel it. Versus, so I've always brought it to the environment, and
this is very evocative the way you write about it, and I was simply going to bring it actually full circle to those who may not perceive what's written here, to the mouthfeel, which is just, the tannins are so smooth, so soft. This wine is lush. It is dangerous because it slides down really easily, and it's frankly delicious. You know, and I think the strawberry and the cherry leads, but if you start paying attention to the aftertaste, you know, you'll get the environmental, the whole picture elements that Carlo's talking about. Sorry to interrupt you. I find this wine,
no, thank you,
really yummy, if you don't mind my using that word.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think also when you talk about the texture, it's another thing that whole cluster has, like this hidden gift that there's in the stems. There's the potassium that kind of helps bond the fruit and tannin, the fruit to, because in California we're so blessed that we do get to 12.5 and 13% potential alcohol with the sunshine, and so by having that beautiful fruit and flower, sometimes it can be disjointing, and the tannin, acid, and minerality can be kind of like you know, in its own orbit, and by having whole cluster, it raises the pH ever so slightly, giving you that velvet center palate that, for me, it bonds that fruit and flower to the tannin, acid, and minerality, and creates that more seamless wine, which I love. And between 17 and 18, there's such different vintages too, which is really kind of always fun to see between.
Can you touch on that very lightly, because some people have 17 and some people have 18?
Yeah, so 17 was a warm year. Both winters were epic in terms of, we had insane amounts of rainfall. It took us out of what would have been the 5th year of a drought in 17. And like there were like 100-foot snow berms in Lake Tahoe in the winter. It was incredible. And so I was anticipating with 17 that we were going to have like an El Nino type of a growing season where there's going to be a lot of mildew pressure. We were going to have to deal with, you know, all the challenges that come with that. And it was the opposite. It was just elegant. It was beautiful. Up until August, we had a very elegant and easy growing season. And then in August, you'll see this is very common in California. We get this kind of couple weeks of dry weather. It's a little bit hot, so maybe a heat wave or two, and it just brings everything into focus. In 17, we had a heat event that was one of the hottest on record. And what it did for us, it was just after veraison, and it just basically dehydrated. So again, the water perspiring through the cell wall of the grape and the acidity, it concentrated the sugars, tannin, and acidity at very low levels of Brix. And so we talked, there was a lot of
sugar, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, degrees of sugar. Sorry, I should. So we there's people saying, well, we're going to irrigate. We don't irrigate. We dry farm at RAEN. There was a lot of talk about, well, there'll be a resurrection if you just water the vines, and we were saying, no way, we're picking. And it was the single best decision we made. And in 2017, we made, I think, some of the most elegant wines that we've made. A great acidity, great freshness with good concentration, which I love. 2018 as kind of a very, you know, and that's what I love about wine, is wine is essentially a place on Earth with a team, and it records climate history. And so when you taste through warm years and cool years, you see that and you taste it and you feel it. And so it's I always say, if people are questioning climate change, talk to a viticulturalist and a winemaker, because if you go talk to Angelo Gaia in Piemonte, or my fiance and her family in Italy, or my father, or any of the friends that have really recorded many vintages, it's incredible to see what's happened. And so 2018, again, a very, very big winter, super powerful, a very beautiful growing season. And then August comes, where you get that last little bit of ripeness. And instead of it being hot like it was in 2017, it got cooler. And it just remained incredibly cool through August and September. And so we kept saying, well, we'll be picking next week and then go out and taste. No, it's going to be a little longer. And it was just this long maturation of flavors. And we were cooler than Burgundy in 18. And so really, really fresh, vibrant, lifted, aromatic wines.
Longer lived, do you think, on the long term, the long haul?
I think the pick decisions in 17 could really make for a very long-lived wine. But I think that if you were talking about a vintage, that I would generalize 2018 as a longer-lived vintage for like the Sonoma Coast. But with RAEN, I think that because of our picking decisions, you'll see both of those wines living a very long time.
That's great. We should talk about home field, sea field.
Yeah, so this is home field, sea field, for us. The labels are meant to be like a roadmap. So my father, he always would say that wine is grown, it's not made, and he kind of came up with the term wine grower. And so our labels are meant to reflect that. So if you were to be out on the Sonoma, or in Sonoma, and you drove to the Sonoma Coast, and then you drove to Fort Rossivia, which is a viticultural area, and then you drove to Seafield or Homefield, you'd be standing in the middle of our 4.8 acre vineyard. And you can see there, we put on the lower right part of the label the acreage of how much we farm. And so when we have,
right here, I see. This is a tiny amount.
Yeah, we only farm 18.5 acres in total, and literally yields. When we talk about yields, it's like, well, whatever Mother Nature gave us in that block is what we were able to bottle that year, assuming it made the quality that we wanted to. And so, so that's the idea of the label, the geographic representation. In terms of the wine, they're very different as well. Not just because of the climate being higher in elevation and closer to the ocean, but also because of the geology. When we first started working with and you'll see pretty big differences between the 17 and the 18, whereas you won't see as big with Royal St. Robert, but with Seafield, it's always our most elegant wine. It's lifted, it's bright, there's this orange pith thing going on. And I always kind of describe it as where the forest meets like a big slab of rock kind of going way off into the ocean, and that minerality you get from that, and the salinity of the ocean. And instead of maybe cherry and wild strawberry, it's more raspberry and orange pith and rose petals. Instead of black tea, it's white
fruit,
tea.
Cranberry even. But what I think is the expression of these two, it's almost like fraternal twins. You have one that's going, hi, how you doing? And just running up to you. And to me, the home field, sea field is reticent, almost Burgundian in its shyness, or, you have to be patient with this wine. But I've been playing with it for over an hour now. And it's just as balanced, only a little more tightly knit. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, I mean, I always look at our Seafield as our most elegant wine that we bottle each year. It's more delicate, more ethereal, and yeah, there's a tightness to it as well.
But pretty.
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
I have to ask you a question that I've been burning to ask you, and we're going to run a little bit over, which I know no one's going to mind, but I want to know if there was an aha moment for you where it was Pinot that you wanted to make. Was it, can you tell us?
Yeah, it was actually, there was a total blew my mind away moment. And it was with my grandfather, and it was in Burgundy. And we were visiting Domaine de la Romane Conti. We had this very tight schedule, like Bordeaux, went to all the first grows. We visited with all of his friends. It was a really cool trip. And in Burgundy, we had a day that changed my life. Actually, it started with with Claude Laflèvre from Domaine Laflèvre, who really inspired me from a farming perspective. Everything that Dante and I do on the farm, I think, has a lot to do with her deep belief of connecting to nature. She is iconic. And then we went to Domaine de la Romani Conti, and I did not realize how iconic nor crazy these wines were at the time in my life. I was going in. I would
so you
say
were an innocent. You were an innocent.
Yeah, I was fairly innocent, and this sounds terrible because Romani Conti being Romani Conti, I went in there kind of not fully understanding what I was stepping into. I knew I loved Pinot Noir, but I didn't really understand, and I knew I loved wine, and I kind of had maybe what I would describe as maybe more of a house palate. So I just drank a lot more of the wines and I was still young. I was just, still not really quite drinking age. And so anyways, we go to Romani Conti, we walk the vineyards, beautiful vineyards. Robert de Villaine has a magical way to talk about talking about farming. And then we dip into the cellar, and I remember the first wine that he thieved out of the barrel and he put into the glass, and it was this delicate, beautiful color. And the aromatics were like, I didn't even have to put my nose in the glass. It was just like jumping out of the glass. And towards the end of the tasting, I was just thinking, wow, this wine is unbelievable. This liquid, it's like crazy. And Robert decided at the end of the tasting to blind my grandfather and us all on a wine. And so he took this bottle out and it had like a thick film of mold, and he dusted it off this bottle and he opened it up and poured this like amber liquid into our glasses. And he said, "What year do you think this is?" And my grandfather and him were having this gaze, and everyone was throwing around all these crazy vintages, and no one really knew quite what it was. And it was really one of my first big blind wine moments. And my grandfather said, 1964, the year that we met. And Robert said, exactly. It was a 64. It was a 64. It was crazy. 64 Richebourg. My grandfather nailed it, and the wine still to this day I'm getting goosebumps just right now thinking about it. It was such a special wine, and I literally was thinking, that's what liquid can taste like. I mean, it was incredible. And so Dante and I have been on this mission, and now Robert's nephew Bertrand, who's running the domain for Romani Conti, is a good friend and imports my fiance's wines to France. And so we have this really cool relationship, and I get to drink a fair amount, not a fair amount, but I get to drink the wines from time to time and check back in. And he'll open the wines. He said, "This was the year you were in town. Well, this was the wine that you had."
You can thank your grandfather for nailing that wine, for having the door open to tasting DRC on occasion, because the rest of us don't. Yeah. But I have to tell you, thank you for sharing that story from your heart. And are you and your fiance, Giovanna, correct?
Yeah.
You purchased a winery together? Will we be when do we get to see these wines in the United States? You're going to be making Nebbiolo.
Yeah, and that's a dream come true. It's a dream to be back in Italy making wines, and then it's a dream property. And we both kind of, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity. There was a vineyard that we had fallen in love with years before we were able to buy it, and then it just became available, and we feel so fortunate. But we'll be bringing the wines in this like spring. I'd say. I'm actually going back on Tuesday to Italy, and so long as my first flight was canceled, so we'll see if I make it. But so we'll be heading that way to be bottling and labeling, and then we'll be.
Sissy, can you put the name in the chat room just so whether it's 6 months or a year, we can start looking for it, because I'd love to see your hand on Nebbiolo. And I hope you go to Sicily and fall in love with Nerello Mascalese, because that's another grape variety that I'm personally in love with. But
yeah, me too. I love Nerello Mascalese. So good.
You have been, go ahead.
No, I think we both gravitate towards the same, same wines. Yeah.
So. I mean, this was a massive pivot, everyone, but we're talking about the leading red grape on the slopes of Mount Etna that sort of combines Nebbiolo's little, mean attitude, and Pinot Noirs, just, magical aromatics, and then it's its own animal also. I don't know if you would characterize it, but I'm utterly intrigued, and I'm only sorry I'm not going to live for another 50 years so I can see what happens with Nerello. Carlo, did you go away? Or are you still there? Oh, did we lose him, Sissy? We might have lost him. But you can't tell me this wasn't a super special time with a gentleman who represents a winemaking family that is in our subconscious. How cool is that? That the name Mondavi and now the name Carlo and Dante Mondavi are something that we can think of and smile. To me, these Pinots are so beautiful. They really are. And they, I can't wait to taste the bodega, Sissy.
Oh, it's lovely. Did we lose Carlo? We must have.
We must have. I don't think he intended to go away.
No, certainly not.
Do you think he was enjoying himself?
Oh, he loves talking about his passion. Well, maybe he'll join us back in, but his phone might have died, quite honestly. That would be my first guess. I know.
Everyone say hi to Sissy. Sissy, what official role do you serve for Carlo and Dante?
I manage sales for them. So we're a really small team. There's just 5 of us. We all live in Napa. And so I help bring the wine from Sonoma, I should say. We live in Napa, but our winery's in Sonoma, of course, as you just saw on the map there, and our vineyards too. Napa is just a little bit of a bigger town, so it's where we all happen to live. But I help bring the wines to you, essentially, and work out all the logistics and the details in between.
Well, you've made this very easy for us. Is the bodega something that is available on the market if we chose to represent it?
Absolutely, it is. It's very small production, so we do allocate it out by market, and we'd love to make you an allocation, absolutely, for Plum Market. I do know that our 17 vintage is sold out. We'll be releasing the 18 vintage here soon to Nathan and his team, and we can set you up with an allocation of that for Michigan and certainly for Illinois as well. Just
curious, and this is a smaller production, longer lived. It's a little more expensive than the other two. Is that correct?
Just a bit more, that's right. The vineyard's much smaller. It's one of the oldest and steepest meter by meter plantings on the Sonoma Coast. So we only make roughly 400 to 500 cases of it a year, 6-packs a year. So it's quite small.
400 or 500 6-packs. So we're talking tiny production. How about the Chardonnay? Is that only for home use?
Yeah, that's even tinier. And we are talking about potentially trying to make a little bit more with the upcoming years, but we're just working with 2 rows right now. It's Charles Ranch is the property. It's owned by the Martinelli family. That's also up in Fort Ross Seaview.
That's California royalty too. The Martinellis own pretty significant property. Now, everything that you're playing with, everything, all the vineyards that you're working, can you explain how this works? You don't own any of them, correct?
Correct. Not currently. There's a couple. I know Carlo would love to. A few of them are not for sale, like the Charles Ranch property. The rows that we have we sort of grandfathered into that program because of the Mondavi's family's relationship with the Martinellis. We of course couldn't buy that land. It's not for sale. But the monopoles that we are working with, which would be Fort Ross Seaview, our Seafield Vineyard, our Bodega Vineyard, those 2 small vineyards, monopole meaning we're the only winery that's working with it. We have a long-term contract, so we can consider it an estate because we're the only ones working with that small vineyard, and also because it's a long-term contract that Carlo has committed to working with the land for X amount of years. I believe it's over 10 years. We do have it in mind to buy land, but we'll see what happens.
Well, I think in one of the videos that I watched today, Carlo was beautifully grateful in explaining how he was happy to have access to work these vineyards that he's working, and that that people respected him and the collective intent of his family to farm these with great respect and love even. And by the way, we're going to hang for a little bit. I know, well, you have to tell Carlo, we're so sorry we lost him, but I am so grateful that he was so forthcoming and open-hearted with us. Does anybody have any questions for Sissy, how long have you been with RAEN?
I'll do my best. I've been with them. I started in August of last year, so just over a year. I've been in wine for almost 10 years. I was with Paul Hobbs before working with Carlo, and then I worked with Maryvale before that. But I'd love if you guys have any questions. I'm sure between myself and Nathan and Anthony, we could probably piece the answer together, or I can also pass any questions on to Carlo and would be happy to follow up with you individually as well.
Nathan, by the way, say hello. Nathan handles our distribution in Michigan.
Hi, thank you, Madeline. Appreciate that. And hi, Sissy.
Good to see you.
And Anthony is the rep for Winebow Distributing in Chicago, and a dear friend of mine. You know, marching his way through the Master Sommelier program, and he has passed the advance, for which I'm very proud. And we like to talk wine. He worked for Plum Market for a while, actually. Any questions from anyone? Any comments? I'm curious if you have both wines, one of them. I know some people are eating, and I'm looking forward to hearing what delicious food you're having.
This is a great turkey wine. This will be perfect in about 5 days.
Yes, absolutely. It would. Actually, it is. It's very highfalutin turkey wine, but why not? Because we're all going to be dining in pods now, correct? At least the government is encouraging us not to travel and to meet each other virtually, as opposed to those of us who we're living with. So why not enjoy a little rain with turkey? Or in my case, vegetarian Thanksgiving fare. Anyone? Elaine, Sherry, Norm?
Okay, I could make a comment.
Please, Elaine.
I have the first one, the St. Robert.
Yes.
And what is so nice about it, drinking the wine, it was just so smooth and so lush, as you have already said, Madeline. But it brought back memories of me being in Sonoma and Napa in 2016. You know, it's just an area that I just love. My question is, the bottle is beautiful. Why did they decide not to have anything on the back of the bottle?
I actually had that question too. That's a brilliant question.
No description, you know, for me being always trying to learn more. So that's my question.
No, great observation. I have actually never heard Carlo speak to that. I know that his style is less is more, and really a fan of the minimalist style. I would imagine that he just had everything he needed there on the front. Nathan, have you ever heard him talk to it when he's been in the market with you?
No, I actually haven't discussed that, but I just know that one thing that we always learned was that everything was relatively like there in your face, right? In the bottle, on the front of the label, with the cork in particular, which is something that I'm glad that we touched on, because that's something I think was so fascinating and so cool that you could touch on the moon phases and when everything was, you know, originated in the vineyard. Personally, I think that the wine, and Carlo talked about this, but I don't know if everybody heard this, but the brown bagging, the blind tasting of some of the most famous wines in the history of winemaking that, you know, his grandfather did, and then what they continue to do this day, going out in the market and kind of having a good time and showing these amazing wines. And I think that's one thing that is what they're trying to go after is, you know, the proof is in the bottle. And as beautiful as labels can be and as much information as can be, I think the minimalist side of it is exactly, Sissy,
it's in the glass, right? It's in, but I will tell you, I will do a quiet little vote for that cunning Sonoma Coast map on the back. It wouldn't hurt for a little version of that to be back there so people can see. You get so close to things in the wine business that we forget that the universe may not know where the Sonoma Coast is. True. So, by the way, one thing I want to mention before, because I wanted to talk to Carlo about it, but we lost him. You will notice nobody's talking about wood. There is, for the most part, neutral oak on these wines. There's just barely a kiss of new oak. And I wanted to ask you, Sissy, are they all small barrels, or is he using any 500-liter barrels?
No, small barrels. He's using the Francois Ferrar barrel, which I don't think he mentioned this, but Robert and Tim together brought that in for the first time to the United States. So he was able to sort of get grandfathered into the Francois Ferrar barrel, which is the house barrel for DRC. They're rather exclusive and very limited. So we're very grateful to work with those barrels. And you are right, very minimal use of new. So these are 4-year air dried. and only 10% new French oak. And that's really just to keep the barrel program alive. He has to every now and again bring in a new barrel.
A little new barrel.
10%.
There's one comment from Yvonne. There seems to be a little bit of leakage. It could have been, that happens occasionally if there's either a short period of time where the wine was exposed to heat, but I think from what you're describing, it's more of a slightly loose cork. But if the wine smells good, I don't think that any exposure to air has done it short-term harm. Would you agree with that, Sissy?
I would say I've often heard that referred to as the bloodline, where the wine is running through the cork. And this might be something Anthony could speak to with his experience studying more than I have in the Somm world. But unless that wine has reached all the way through the top, if you had wine pushing out of the top of the cork, then that would be reason for concern. But I've opened many a bottle where I see that. You can see the wine is starting to creep and absorb into the cork a little bit. But as you said, Madeline, unless you can smell any sort of oxygenation or any sort of off,
Not to worry.
wine, then I don't usually worry, or unless I see wine having pushed through the top. But Anthony, maybe do you have anything more to add to that?
Sissy, that's actually an interesting observation that I've never really heard, what you just talked about the bloodline, but it makes sense. But I've just going back to the way Madeline said it and you did as well, and just sort of a practical sense, if the wine is good, then there's no problem. And also smell the wine, not the cork. I think that's
actually very important.
Often
right.
a bad practice people get into is smelling the cork, which can have off flavors, but the wine can be fine. So
yep, exactly right. The cork is going to smell like a wet cork. So
correct.
Or, sometimes, remember he talked about de Villain Aubert pulling this, mold covered bottle, but the part of the cork that has come in contact with the wine is pristine. So it's a non-issue. I have to do this because I'm going to forget, but you mentioned Paul Hobbs before I did, because we're actually going to do a tasting with him, not this coming Thursday because it's Thanksgiving, but Thursday, December 3rd. And I have to tell you an insider comment. Sissy texted me at 7 p.m. Eastern time on last Saturday. We were putting this together, and we had put we sent out the RAEN invitation with mistakenly a picture of Paul Hobbs instead of a picture of Carlo. So, best laid plans.
Well, it was perfect that I happened to see him, having worked with both gentlemen. I recognized Paul's picture.
I didn't know you worked with Paul.
Did, yeah, for two years, just before Carlo. So I'm just looking here at what wines you'll be tasting. That portfolio is beautiful.
We're tasting, we're tasting a Cross Barn, Chardonnay, Paul Hobbs Pinot, and a couple of Malbecs from Argentina. But didn't Paul was involved in the Opus One project, wasn't he?
He was.
If memory serves, right.
That's absolutely right.
He was in the deep end of the pool in California before, he became famous working with Argentine Malbec. But you see, there are really very few degrees of separation in the wine world. Any more questions before we liberate Sissy? Because we've kept her for almost an extra half hour.
Oh, no, this has been wonderful. I appreciate all of you guys joining in.
The wines are showing like $1 million. And interestingly, in my glass, the Royal St. Robert is sort of, relaxing a little bit. It's not as effusive. And the home field, Seafield, is just showing its stuff, and very balanced, but still sleek and very structured.
I have a comment, Madeline, if I may.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
I was just remembering when I was really learning about wine, maybe 15 years ago or so, and would taste a lot of wines from France, Pinot Noirs from France, or wines from California, and would ask these questions oftentimes, why do they taste different? And would really never get good answers other than, well, it just tastes that way. Well, why? Other than terroir, there was a lot of winemaking decisions, because the wines from France were very neutral and elegant, and the oak was integrated, and they were lower alcohol. And the wines from the United States just tasted like really overripe fruit and oak. And I said, well, why don't you just use less oak? And there was never a good answer. why don't you use whole cluster like they do in Burgundy? Well, there was never a good answer. And the whole thing was just like, am I the only one that's paying attention here? Like, what is going on? And no one was farming in the extreme Sonoma Coast either. And it was like, well, what about over there? Well, you know, it's too cold over there. And now in like this 10 to 15, it's all flipped, and all these questions have now been answered. And instead of there being this wide pull, and even when, you know, Madeline and I were tasting so much 10, 15 years ago together, and in the court of sommeliers perspective, how they teach, it was like old world, new world. They're so different. And now there's just one world. The lines are blurred.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's so cool. And, you
So
know,
to speak,
I'm just really
yes.
thankful that we are now much more connected in this short period of time.
Beautifully said, because, you know, at the end of the day, there are people trying to make great wine everywhere. And here you have Carlo and Dante that are paying, you know, that are friends with Aubert's children, right? And making Burgundian inspired wine in California, in an area that 20 years ago was considered, you know, nobody considered it as an option. I want to thank everybody. Your company is just dynamite. I'll send a follow-up per usual. I'll put my email on there if you have any follow-up questions. Sissy, you have to promise and tell Carlo we loved his company.
I absolutely will. I can almost guarantee his phone died. Otherwise, he would have texted me by now to say what's going on. So he probably gave us the last little bit of juice that he had, and he's probably driving a very dark, windy road home from the vineyard. So I'll pass along your message. I know that he will be really bummed to have missed the end of this. The conversation's been really great to sit and watch and also be a part of. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
There is more than one household that will be enjoying RAEN Pinot Noir at Thanksgiving. And I'm very happy I've made a couple new friends. Thank you very much. And we will look forward to tracking RAEN's progress and to tasting the Piedmontese wines. Everyone have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Hopefully we'll see you week after next. And your support and company is so well appreciated. So, a bientôt, stiniyasas, to your good health. Stay safe. Please be careful. These are such challenging times, but here we are drinking great wine together. Anthony and Nathan, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your company and support. Take good care, everyone.
Have a good night. Thanks again.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a good night.